Ako po si Chief Engineer Bienvenido Lorque at ang pag-usapan natin ngayong gabi ay ang International Convention, adapting the convention, its entry into force, accession, amendment, enforcement, and tacit acceptance procedure. Alam mo kung gusto ko ipaabot sa inyo ito, sa mga pangyayari sa ngayon, alam natin na the International Convention is not a law. Ngunit, pag na-ratify ng isang bansa, kagaya ng Pilipinas, at naisalin natin sa ating batas, yan ay nagiging batas. So, sa ngayong panahon ng pandemya, may mga problema tayo gawa na marami ang ating mga seafarers na na-stranded sa labas ng bansa. Yung association ng mga manning agency ay gumagawa rin ng aksyon. Ngunit para bang napabayaan tayo ng gobyerno, despite of the fact na ang annual remittances ng seafarers is more or less $5.600 billion. So, ganun na lang ba? Tatanggap ang gobyerno natin. Tapos ang kanilang obligasyon sa convention ay napabayaan. So parang hindi maganda pakinggan, kaya gusto ko ipaabot sa inyo ito kung ano ang tinatawag na convention, ano ang ratification, ano ang accession, ano ang enforcement, para at least may ideya kayo na ay obligasyon pala ng gobyerno ito na ibigyan tayo ng ating kalayaan at hindi napabayaan lamang dahil sabi ay ganyan kasi word ano to hindi maganda. So iklaro natin itong ngayong gabi ang pag-usapan natin ay pagaya ng mga international convention, international treaties, paano natin i-adapt at paano ang entry into force niya, accession, amendment, enforcement, and tacit acceptance ng isang bansa na nag-ratify nito. So, the international revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries and the upsurge of international commerce, which followed, resulted in the adoption of a number of international treaties related to shipping, including safety. The subject covered include tonnage measurement, the prevention of collision, signaling, and others. By the end of the 19th century, suggestions had even been made for the creation of a permanent international maritime body to deal with this future measurement. The plan was not put into effect, but international cooperation continued with the 20th century with the adoption of still more internationally developed treaties. By the time IMO came into existence in 1958, several important international conventions had been developed including the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea in 1948. Now, International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution by Sea by oil of 1954 and treaties dealing with the load line and prevention of collision at sea. IMO was made responsible for ensuring that majority of these conventions were kept up to date. It was also given the task of developing new conventions and when the need arose. The creation of IMO coincidence with a period of tremendous change in the world shipping, and the organization was kept busy from the start developing new conventions and ensuring that existing instruments be kept pace with changes in the shipping technology. It is now responsible for more than 50 international conventions and the agreement and has adopted numerous protocols and amendments. Now, here is adopting a convention. This is part of the process which IMO as an organization is most closely involved. IMO has 6 main bodies concerned with the adoption or implementation of the convention. The Assembly and Council are the main organ, and the committee involved are the Maritime Safety Committee, the Maritime Environmental Protection Legal Committee, and the Legal Committee and the Facilitation Committee. Alam mo, nung in-interview ako ni Commissioner Pobre sa PRC at saka ni Commissioner Abad, ang sabi ni Abad sa akin, Ben, do you have idea bakit na bawat meeting sa International Maritime Organization, bakit itong Maritime Safety Committee ay nandoon? So, bakit nandoon sila? Alam kong bakit. Negosyo ito, kagaya ng mga insurance. So, pinag-usapan ng Maritime Safety Committee kung ano ngayon ang maaari din siguro na pagkitaan nila. Kaya itong mga convention na ito may kaugnayan sa mga safety, pollution, etc. ay involvement ito ng mga taga-Maritime Safety Committee members. Although tayo ng mga seaman, hindi natin ito napansin. Gawaan na hindi naman natin alam kung ano pinag-usapan nila doon. Pag lumabas na mga circular, saka pa lang natin malaman na ay ganoon pala na pag-usapan. Now, development in shipping and other related industries are discussed by membership in these bodies, and the need of the new convention or amendment to existing convention can be raised if any of them. Now, it comes to entry into force. The adoption of the convention marked the conclusion of only the first stage of a long process. Before the convention comes into force, that is, before it becomes binding upon government which has ratified it, it has to be accepted formally by individual government. Now, here is the signature, ratification, acceptance, approval, and accession. The term signature, ratification, acceptance, and approval, and accession refers to some of the methods by which the state can express its consent to be bound by the treaty. As far as signature is concerned, consent may be expressed by signature, where the treaties provide that signature shall have that effect. So, ibig sabihin nito, once you sign or ratified the convention by signing, so it is effective and it should be treated in good faith. That is in accordance with the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, 1969. Kaya palagi ko inulit-ulit yan ang Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties of 1969 because ang lahat ng convention and treaties or international convention and treaties are governed by the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties. Kasi kung hindi natin gamitan ng Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, kalit-silitsi ang interpretation. Kagaya sa nangyari dito sa ating bansa, ang STCW, hindi naman to mandatory requirement ang OLC at MLC, ngunit ginamit nila na armas para pagkitaan. So kawawa ang mga marino natin. Lalo pa maging kawawa kung hindi tayo ma-recognize ng International Maritime Organization or European Maritime Safety Agency na compliance tayo sa STCW. Dahil kung ma-blacklist tayo, ang marina employee, continuous ang kanilang sahod. Pero ang mga seaman, hindi na makasakay sa European Union flagship. So, consent may be expressed by signature where the treaty provides that signature shall have that effect. It is otherwise established that the negotiating state were agreed that signature should have that effect. So the intention, of the state to give that effect to signature appear from the full power of its representative or was expressed during the negotiation of the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties in 1969 under its Article 12.1. You have to remember, at kayo na mga marino na nakakinig ngayon, you can open the STCW book. Makikita ninyo dyan sa page 5 na sa forward, last paragraph, maliwanag ang sinabi dyan that the interpretation of Part A and the convention or the code has to be Vienna Convention has to be applied. Bakit nilagay nila dyan? Para hindi tayo magkalit-silitsi. Ngunit paulit-ulit ko binabanggit yan sa marina na gamitan ng ordinaryong meaning lamang. Huwag yung pahabain mo na ang singular, ginawa mo plural. Pero pinagtatawanan lang nila ko dahil wala daw yan. Kasi hindi naman nila mapagpirahan ang mga nasabi ko. Now, in such a situation, signature does not signify consent of the state to be bound by the treaty. So, ibig sabihin, pag napirmahan mo, it does not signify the consent of the state to be bound by the treaty. Although it does oblige the state to refrain from act would defect the object and purpose of the treaty until such time as it has made its intention clear not to become part of the treaty. So dito sa mga obligasyon na ito, may mga dahilan ang Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties dyan na kung hindi mo talaga masunod, maaari ka nila tanggalin sa grupo nila. So yan ang mahirap dyan. So isa dyan sa example ay itong threat nila na i-blacklist ang Pilipinas sa International Maritime Organization for our non-compliance with the standard of training, certification, watchkeeping for the seafarers. Now, here is the signature subject to ratification, acceptance, and approval. Most multilateral treaties contain a clause providing that the state may express its consent to be bound by the treaty by the instrument by signature subject to ratification. In such a situation, signature alone will not suffice to bind the treaty, but must be followed by the deposit of an instrument or ratification with the depository of the treaty. This option of expressing consent to be bound by signature subject to ratification, acceptance, or approval originated in the era when international communication were not instantaneous as they are today. It was meant of ensuring that the state representative did not exceed their power of instruction with regards to the making of particular treaty. The word acceptance and approval basically mean the same as ratification, but they are less formal and not technical and might be prepared by some states which might have constitutional difficulties with the term ratification. Many states nowadays chose this option, especially in relation to the multinational treaties, as it provides them with the opportunity to ensure that any unnecessary legislation is enacted and other constitutional requirements fulfilled before entering into treaty commitment. Now, dito sa STCW nito, alam niyo kung anong batas ang ginawa ng Angkla Party List. So, they made a law, Republic Act 10635, at ginawa nila ang Maritime Industry Authority as single maritime association, single maritime organization to implement STCW convention. Ngunit ang ini-question ko dyan na international convention or STCW convention na ginawa single maritime administration ang Marina. Pero paano masabi na single maritime administration? Dahil ang Maritime Labor Convention ay hawak ng luli. So, nung kinwestiyon ko yan si Congressman Manalo, sabi sa akin na hintayin mo lang dahil ilipat natin yan sa Marina, sooner or later. Pero yan nga, ulit-ulit ko sinasabi na natapos lang termino niya sa Kongreso, hanggang ngayon hindi na ilipat. So, malaki ang problema natin kasi may mga bagay-bagay ko minsan na mahirap unawain dahil sa corruption. Okay, so now the term for consent to be expressed by signature subject to acceptance or approval are very similar to ratification in their effect. This is borne out by Article 14.2 of the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, which provides that the consent of the state to be bound by the treaty is expressed by acceptance or approval under conditions similar to those which applied to ratification. Now, here is another term, accession. The most multinational treaty are open for signature for a specified period of time. Accession is the mention used by the state to become a party to a treaty which it did not sign while the treaty was open for signature. Technically, accession requires the state in question to deposit an instrument of accession with the depository. Article 15 of the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties provides that consent by accession is possible where the state so provides or were it otherwise. In the amendment, technology and techniques in the shipping industry change very rapidly these days. As a result, not only are new conventions required by existing one need to be kept up or update. Kept up to date, I mean. For example, the International Convention on Safety of Life at Sea, 1960 was amended 6 times after it entered into force in 1965. In 1966, 1967, 1968, 1969, 1971, and 1973. That's why tinatawag ngayon itong Safety of Life at Sea as SOLAS 73-74. Kasi ang final amendment nila noong 1973. And in 1974, a completely new convention was adopted incorporating all these amendments and other major changes. And it has itself been modified on numerous occasions. In early convention, amendment came into force only after the percentage of constructing state, usually 2/3, has accepted them. This normally meant that more acceptance were required to amend the convention than were originally required to bring it into force in the first place. especially where number of states which are parties to the convention is very large. This percentage require in practice lead to long delay in bringing amendment into force. To remedy the situation, a new amendment procedure was devised in IMO. This procedure has been used in the case of conventions such as Convention of International Regulation for Preventing Pollution at Sea, 1972, the International Convention for Prevention of Pollution from Ships, 1973, and SULAS, 1974, all of which incorporated procedure involving the tacit acceptance of amendment by the state. Instead of requiring that an amendment shall enter into force after being accepted by, for example, two-thirds of the parties, the tacit acceptance procedure provides that an amendment shall enter into force at a particular time unless before that date objection to the amendment are received from the specified number of parties. In the case of the 1974 SOLAS Convention, an amendment to most of the annexes which constitute the technical part of the convention is deemed to have been accepted at the end of 2 years from date on which the unless it is communicated to contracting government, unless the amendment is objected to by more than two-thirds of the contracting government, or the contracting government owning not less than 50% of the world gross merchant tonnage. This period may be varied by the Maritime Safety Committee, which is a minimum limit of 1 year. So you have to remember that that could be variable for that particular minimum limit of 1 year. As was expected, the tacit acceptance procedure has greatly speeded up the amendment process. Amendment entered into force within 18 to 24 months. Generally compared to this, none of the amendments adopted to the 1960 SOLAS Convention between 1966 and 1973 received sufficient acceptance to satisfy the requirement for entry into force. Now, here comes enforcement. The enforcement of IMO Convention depends upon government of member parties. As I mentioned earlier, convention is not a law unless it is adopted by the party concerned. Contracting government enforce the provision of International Maritime Organization Convention as far as their own ships are concerned, and also set the penalties for infringement where these are applicable. They may also have certain limit power in respect of the ship of other government. In some conventions, certificates are required to be carried on board ship to show that they have inspected and have met the required standards. So these countries, the ID certificate, are normally accepted as a proof by authorities from other states that the vessel concerned has reached the required standard, but in some cases, further action can be taken. The 1974 SOLAS Convention, for example, state that officers carrying out the controls shall take such steps as will ensure that the ship shall not sail until it can proceed to sea without danger to the passenger or the crew. This can be done if there are clear grounds for believing that the condition of the ship and its equipment does not correspond substantially with the particulars of the certificate. So an inspection of this nature would, of course, take place within the jurisdiction of four states. But when an offense occurred in international water, the responsibility for imposing a penalty rests with the flag state. So kung doon nasa sa labas sa tubig o sa gitna ng laot, ang flag state na dyan ang may responsibilidad. Should an offense occurred within the jurisdiction of another state, however, that state can either cause proceeding to be taken in accordance with its own law to give details of the offense to the flag state so that the latter can take appropriate action. So under the term of the 1969 Convention relating to international auto intervention on high seas, contracting states are empowered to act against ships of other countries which had been involved in an accident or have been damaged on the high seas if there is a grave risk of oil pollution occurring as a result. The way in which this power may be used are very carefully defined, and in most convenient, the flag state is primarily responsible for enforcing the convention as far as own ships and their personnel are concerned. The organization itself has no power to enforce the convention. However, IMO or International Maritime Organization has been given the authority to beat the training, examination, certification procedures of contracting states to the International Convention and standard training certification watchkeeping for seafarers in 1978. This was one of the most important changes made in 1995 amendment to the convention, which entered into force in February 1, 1997. Government has to provide relevant information to International Maritime Organization Maritime Safety Committee, which will judge whether or not the country concerned met the requirement of the convention. So yan ang nangyari sa atin sa Pilipinas na since 2006, inauditan nila tayo and they found out that we have so many deficiencies. However, every year, that particular deficiencies, hindi man lang natin na itukoy because of graft and corrupt practices. So ngayon, itong huli na audit noong 2020, 2020, it was submitted in March 1, 1921. That audit result, according to IMSA, they are giving the Philippines 6 months time to rectify that particular deficiency. And other than the 6 months provision, they still give us 2 months. So mayroon pa tayo, dapat September ngayon, tapos na tayo, matikita na sila, pero parang binigyan pa tayo hanggang November. So sana by November, ma-declare nila na tayo ay compliant sa STCW Convention, dahil kung sabihin nila na hindi tayo compliant, may tendency na ma-blacklist ang Pilipinas at ang mga seaman natin hindi na makapaglayag sa European countries. So kaya napaka-importante ito pag-usapan natin ng convention para maunawaan ng ating mga kapwa marino na napaka-importante pala ito ang compliance ng mga convention na ito. At hindi pwede pabayaan ng ating gobyerno kasi ang mga empleyado ng gobyerno, tuloy-tuloy ang kanilang sahod sakali na magka-diferensya ang findings ng European Maritime Safety Agency at saka International Maritime Organization. At ang kawawa dito ay ang mga Filipino seafarers dahil sila ang mawalaan ng trabaho. So here comes the relationship between the convention and interpretation. Ito pa ulit-ulit ko na sinasabi. Pero parang walang nakarinig. Some subjects are covered by more than one treaty. The question then arises which one prevails. The Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties provide in Article 30 for rule regarding the relationship between successive treaties relating to the same subject matter. Answer to question regarding interpretation of the treaties can be found in Article 31, 32, and 33 of the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties. A treaty shall be interpreted in good faith. Ulitin ko, a treaty shall be interpreted in good faith in accordance with the ordinary meaning to be given to the term of the treaty in their context and in the light of its object and purposes. So ito ang ginagawa ng Marina ngayon. Ang kamalian na gawa ng Marina. Ang OLC at saka MLC, which is IMO model course, ginawa nila mandatory requirement. So, simply to say, it is not in accordance with the interpretation or Article 31 governing interpretation of the Vienna Convention of the Treaties. Kasi, hindi naman mandatory requirement. Bakit na-require mo maging mandatory? Pangalawa, ito pa ngayon ang existing na nanatili na gusto ko to na dapat abolish din ito. Itong every year, a separer has to undergo retraining and refreshing. Napakaliwanag doon sa STCW, sa STCW code, na every 5 years, you have to present evidence that you are competent in that particular field. So, kung tingnan mo doon sa guide for the separers, documentary proof lang inahingi. So, if the separers has a certificate coming from master of the vessel, attested by the manning agency, na every month na ginagawa nila yan, why you have to undergo training and refreshing? Dahil napakaliwanag na buwan-buwan ginagawa mo yan sa barko. Not unless lang kung tumigil ka ng sakay ng 5 taon, doon ka pala mag-retraining or mag-refresh dahil may mga bagay-bagay na hindi na ayon doon sa ginagawa sa barko ang iyong nalalaman. Pero kung continuous lang ang sakay mo, why you have to undergo retraining and refreshing? Dahil lalo pa kung 2 buwan ka pala bumaba. So buwan-buwan ginagawa nyo sa barko yan. Bakit ka mag-refresh? Bakit ka mag-retrain? Samantala ang refresh mo, ang retrain mo ay dyan lang sa lupa. Wala naman, di mo naman makita doon sa barko. So hindi ba may mga kabaliktaran ng ating interpretation? So kaya kung nakikinig ang ating gobyerno, kung sino man sa inyo ng mga marino, pakipaabot ninyo sa administrasyon that the interpretation of the STCW has to be governed by the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties. At napakaliwanag na sabi niya that treaties has to be interpreted in good faith and in accordance to ordinary meaning. Huwag yung dagdagan. Pwede siguro bawasan, pero huwag dagdagan para pagkitaan. Paliwanag. So, when treaty has been authenticated in 2 or more languages, the text is equally authoritative in its language, unless the treaty provides or the parties agree that in case of divergence, a particular text shall prevail. So, here comes the uniformity of the law and conflict of the rule of the law. A substantive part of maritime law has been uniform in international treaties. However, every state in party to all convention and the existing convention do not always cover all questions regarding that specific subject. In those cases, conflict of law rules unnecessary to decide the national law applies. This conflict of law rule can either be found in the treaty or, in most cases, in national law. So let's go to the International Maritime Organization Convention. The majority of conventions adopted under the auspices of the International Maritime Organization, or for which the organization is otherwise responsible, fall into three main categories. The first group is concerned with the maritime safety. The second is with the prevention of marine pollution. And the third, with liabilities and compensation, especially in relation to damage caused by pollution. Kaya ito pa ang isa. Gumawa tayo ng batas in 2007 na kung tawagin ay Republic Act 9483. Kung saan may sinasabi doon ng batas na for every liter of oil delivered by oil tanker or oil barge, magbayad sila ng 10 centimos sa Maritime Industry Authority. Dahil nung mangyari ang pollution sa Guimaras nung araw, wala tayong pagkakapuna ng panggastos para malinis natin ang ating karagatan. So gumawa tayo ng batas. Ngunit ang napansin ko, parang magaling lang tayo gumawa ng batas. Pagdating sa implementation, kulang. Napansin nyo yan? Marami tayong batas. Pero pagdating sa implementation, di pa nga na-implement, kuminsan na mindahanan nila o napalitan na ang batas. So hindi maganda yan. Alam mo kung bakit? Dapat, ang pinaka-importante dyan, ma-implement natin ang batas. Hindi natin kailangan sobra katalino sa Kongreso. Ganun din sa Senado. Ang kailangan natin, yung mga tao na very much concerned doon sa safety, hindi lamang ng barko, kagaminto, kundi kasama ang mga tao at yung mga nasa paligid sa environmental. Pero mahirap unawain. Kaya ako minsan natanong ko sarili ko eleksyon tayo na eleksyon. Tapos ang mga galing naman ng mga politiko, hindi naman manalo dahil sa ngayon, may balita ako na may mga padded voters sa Comelec na more or less 12 million. So kung ng 12 million na i-apply nila yan sa kanilang boto, ang mga magaling na mga politiko dyan, talo. Ang mga bulok na politiko na nagbayad doon sa Comelec, yun ang manalo. Kasi kung makuha nila 12 million yan, biro mo may boto kagad na 12 million. Kasi sino makatalo sa'yo dyan? Ang iba dyan, 500 pala boto dyan, ikaw may 12 million na. So, kaya ginasigaw natin yan palagi, lalo ngayon. Bukas may plenary session ang shadow government na ginpost ko na naimbitahan natin ang mga national candidate kagaya ng president, vice president, senator, congressman na kung maaari pag-aralan ninyo at mag-join kayo bukas sa plenary session namin. Ano ba ang kaibahan ng presidential form of government sa parliamentary form of government? So sa parliamentary form of government, may tinatawag yan na question hour. So sa isang linggo o bawat araw, maaari natin tanungin ang ating mga member ng parliament. Ano ba nangyari sa departamento mo? So kung hindi na nila maipaliwanag ng tama at dumating sa punto na makapagbawas ng kanilang trust rating, wala na silang option, kundi na mag-resign. Dahil wala silang lumalabas na wala silang silbi. Pero sa presidential system, kagaya ngayon, makikita nyo naman, ilang bilyon na pala ang wala na pira. At pagdating sa mga maskara, face mask, face shield, ang 2 pesos ay kung magkano naman ang inkarga nila. So, huli na natin nalaman na naloko na pala tayo. Magbili ka ng face shield sa labas, may taga 5 piso, 8 pesos, 10 piso, mataas. Ay sa kanila, 127 bilhin nila ng face shield. Face mask nila may higit 20, samantala na 4 na piraso ay 10, o 5 piraso ay 10. So kung may question hour ito, matagal na natin sana ito na correct. Kaya ako palagi kong ina-post yan sa Facebook na ang solusyon sa korupsyon is to change the system of our government from presidential to parliamentary. So kung nakikinig kayo ngayon, bukas 8 to 12, may plenary session kami, mag-join kayo. At doon ipaliwanag ninyo kung bakit ayaw ninyo ang parliamentary system of government. So sabi ni Juan Ponce Enrile, Senator Ponce Enrile, payag siya sa parliamentary system of government. Ang hindi lang siya aminado doon sa federal. So ang sagot ko sa kanya, okay, kung yan ang kagustuhan ng nakararami na mag-parliamentary system tayo, dito ka natin pag-usapan ng federalismo. Now, if the majority of the people or if the will of the people preferred federal system of government, then we have to merge the federal system to parliamentary system. But kung ayaw nila ang federal, so parliamentary lang muna tayo. Salbahin muna natin tong issue ng corruption. So the first group is concerned with the maritime safety. The second is the prevention of maritime pollution. The third is liability of compensation. Outside this major grouping are a number of other conventions dealing with facilitation, tonnage, measurement, and lawful act against the shipping and salvage, etc. Now, dito na, nangyari na, bumirang na sa gobyerno natin ang mali na interpretasyon ng convention. Nagbumirang. So the owner or the manning group reiterate call for seaman exemption from travel cap. So ito in-report to ni Len Bacani. Sabi niya, the licensed manning agency have elevated their appeal to President Rodrigo Duterte to help bring home thousands of fatigued Filipino seafarers, many of them serving beyond contract on board international vessel. So dito na natin mapatunayan ngayon kung gumawa ang ating gobyerno, tinanggap ng ating gobyerno ang pagratifika o naratifikahan nila na tawag na Maritime Labor Convention. Doon sa Labor Convention, may mga batas doon. Kaya na-prepare ko pag-usapan itong convention dahil ang Maritime Labor Convention or MLC ay isa sa 4 na pilar yan ng International Maritime Organization. So, dapat concern ng ating gobyerno dyan dahil kawawa naman ang ating mga marino na nabanggit ko nga, ang remittances ng ating mga seaman ay $5.6 billion taon-taon. So, bakit para sabi ang mga marino ay buhay na bayani. Buhay na bayani yan, tapos pinabayaan mo. Kaya lang binubula mo lang ang mga seaman. So kaya dapat tayo mga seaman, mag-unite tayo at i-correct natin ang matagal ng kamalian na ginagawa sa atin. Kasi bandang huli, kawawa ang ating mga marino. At ito, isingit ko lang ito. Huwag natin sabihin na habang kailan ay may seaman. Ngayon, pinag-usapan na ito sa Japan na may gumagawa na sila ngayon ng mga barko na wala nang seaman. Unmanned na ang mga barko. So kailan ka mag-react kung wala ka na masampahan? Sana nung araw pa ginawa natin ng maganda na yan para hanggang ngayon may barko pa tayo masampahan. So kung mangyari yan, paano ang mga huling henerasyon natin? Although sabihin ng iba, may nagsabi sa akin, ano pakialam mo sa kanila? Yan. Kung makasarili ka lang, tama yan ang sa iyo na yan. Pero kung if you are concerned with the generation to come, ay bakit hindi mo i-correct ang mga kamalian na ginagawa mo ngayon? Tama o mali? Now, the Association of Licensed Manning Agency made an urgent appeal to the Chief Executive after its earlier letter requesting an increase in inbound flight passengers limit as well as in quarantine facilities which had fallen largely on deaf ear. So, biro mo yan ang termino ni deaf ear, bingi. Ano nangyari sa bansa natin? So, in their latest letter to President, the Alma Maritime Group, an association of 55 licensed manning agency in the country, expressed their utmost appreciation of the Chief Executive's strong overseas Filipino worker stands unequivocal support for the welfare, safety, and employability of our Filipino seafarers. Thousands of Filipino workers aboard vessel need to return home, as most are now overstaying aboard and are suffering from overfatigue. This time, the Manning Group, responsible for deploying 160,000 seafarers, has proposed a new track while addressing the same concern of relaxing the cap in inbound passenger and providing additional hotel room for guaranteed purpose to facilitate the return of the country's beleaguered seafarers. Specifically, ALMA is echoing the mining industry call to extend the spirit of Philippine Green Lane to returning seafarers. It can be recalled that Green Lane was adopted to ensure unhampered but safe movement of seafarers for development overseas. This time, the ALMA Maritime Group appealed to the Green Lane is to facilitate the return of our Filipino seafarers to our home country. The group does request the following. 1. The Philippine Authority automatically accept returning Filipino seafarers even if beyond passenger seat limit currently imposed. In short, we seek to exempt the Filipino seafarers from passenger limit without a need for a specific exemption case. Ito madugtong ko lang ito. Kagabi, may programa kami na may gamot si Dr. Abiso na naimbento na agad-agad mamatay ang virus o anumang bakterya na makapasok sa ating lalamunan o sa ating katawan. Pero nagtaka ako na recognize ito ng Food and Drugs Administration. Ngunit bakit hindi na promote ng Department of Health na para itulong ito sa mga nangangailangan? So ito ba dahil mura lang at hindi mapagpirahan ng Department of Health? Yan ang malungkot na pangyayari. So ang ating mga seaman na doon sila ngayon sa labas na naghihintay kung kailan sila makauwi, ang kanilang pamilya na nag-alala rin kung kailan makauwi ang kanilang mahal sa buhay. Okay, tama yan. Kumikita sila. Pero iba ang kumikita ka sa pagmamahal. Kahit anong dami ng pera mo kung wala naman nagmamahal sa iyo, malungkot ka pa rin. So, pangalawa nila na demand, the Philippine Authority direct the airline to honor the Filipino seafarers' marine fare to become cheaper compared to normal booking rate and fully flexible to change with zero to minimal rebooking charges. Moreover, the group has requested an audience with the President along with the other concerned parties to discuss further its proposal and draw action in coordination with the Office of the President. As things now stand, now international flight seats are randomly cancelled by the airline due to this passenger limit, leaving seafarers either extending tenure on board or stranded aboard waiting for weeks or a month for Philippine flight to become available. Now, ito masingit ko lang. In response to the World Convention or International Convention which was ratified by the Philippines, itong mga manning group nito, may mga pira ito. May mga ari ng barko, may-ari ng barko ang kanilang mga principal. Why is it, for compliance of the convention, why is it that the government cannot address this issue by calling all of them? Okay, sige, mag-ambag tayo. Aside from the ambag ng gobyerno, mag-ambag din kayo para na resolba natin itong mga problema. Ngunit ang masaklap dito, may mga balita ako na ang pamasahe nung araw ay halos na doble, kung hindi na triple. So, dahil ba dito sa nangyari sa atin pag-experience ng pandemya, ang pira na pandemyari? Hindi ba? So, bakit bigla umangat ang mga pamasahe at walang aksyon ang ating gobyerno? So, hindi ba medyo may kabalian? Now, here comes, ituloy ko. The current cost of international flight to Philippines range from 1,500 and a peak of 4,500 per person. Minimum 4,500. Kung ang isang seaman, ang sahod lang niya ay 1,200, ilang buwan mo kakayod sa barko kung ikaw mabasahe pa uwi, kung mamilit ka. Ilang buwan mo kayo rin yan, ang 4,500. Di ba napakasaklap? Samantala na we are governed by international treaties and international conventions. So the cost itself is fourfold the monthly wages of a regular seafarer. So sila may sabi nila fourfold. Akin nga, doble lang, triple. Sa kanila sabi nila 4. So it is a known practice in airline travel that seafarers are given a special marine fare rate. Supposed to be may 30% discount ang seafarer, pero ewan ko ngayon, hindi na yata nabigyan ng discount ang mga marino. Dahil bibiro mo, 4,500. So the airline are given proof that the travelers is an active seafarer, so they issue ticket for them plus as marine fare. Fortunately, our Filipino seafarers no longer enjoy the marine fare given the restriction in returning home. So sa madaling salita, hindi na sila na kapag discount pag umuwi sila. Due to this limited and or canceled international flight set, crew change become further challenging to arrange. We underscore that this problem is unique to Filipino seafarers. Our seafarers or other nationalities have no limitation in going home or no risk of being stranded in transit for their home country, which heighten the risk of COVID-19 exposure. In our maritime operation, we are the only country in the world that banned its national from returning the Alma reads. What worse, due to this limitation, many ship owners to avoid significant additional costs are now shifting to non-Filipino seafarers, which result in loss of job opportunities to Filipino seafarers. Now, madugtong ko lang dito, some countries or na flag state, they are now studying na kung halimbawa ang flag state mo ay doon sa Europe ay German flag. Now they prefer to recruit German seafarers para hindi nila problema kung magpalit ng mga crew sooner or later. So kung maganyan ang mangyari, ang Pilipino, we have more or less 1.6 million registered seafarers. Saan natin isakay ang ating mga seaman dahil wala tayong mga barko. Kaya ako I encourage the government, if ever possible, that if we could take over our public utilities, which is from electricity alone, the government could earn 1.58 trillion pesos. And considering that the 584 billion has to be spent for the salary and maintenance of electricity, if the 1 trillion we have to buy a ship at an average cost of 500 billion each, 2,000 na barko mabili natin taon-taon. So kung ma-take over ng gobyerno, let's say for example sa simula nung nagkaroon ng pandemya, marami na sana tayong barko ngayon. So kung mangyari man ito, ang mga marino natin hindi maging kawawa. So sana naintindihan ninyo, masuportahan ninyo ang mga ideya na ganyan kasi itong akin nabanggit ay hindi para sa akin. So sabagay, hindi na ako sumasakay, pero nakikita ako na malaki ang problema sakali na mangyari ito. So, ibalik natin dito na ano ang International Convention. So, the International Convention or a treaty is an agreement between different countries that is legally binding to a contracting state. Existing international convention covers different different area, including trade, science, crime, disarmament, transport, and human rights. So a convention becomes legally binding to a particular state when a state ratifies it. Ulitin ko, it is legally binding, but it could not be considered a law unless it is implemented by that particular state who ratifies the convention. Signing does not make a convention binding, but it indicates support for the principle of the convention and the country intention to ratify it. As contracting states are legally bound to adhere to the principle included in the convention, a monitoring body is open, set up to assess the state party progress in implementing the convention by considering reports periodically submitted to the state. Human Rights Convention do not contain an enforcement mechanism to compel the state to comply with the principle of the convention or with the recommendation of monitoring body, and the implementation of this convention depend on the commitment of each country. Why do we need convention for person with disability? Don't they have the same right to everyone else? The right enumerated in the Universal Declaration of Rights is perfect word would be enough to protect everyone. But in practice, certain groups such as women, children, and refugees have fared far worse than other groups, and international conventions are in place to protect and promote the human rights of this group. Similarly, the 650 million people in the world living with a disability, about 10% of such world population, lack opportunities to the mainstream population. They encounter the myriad of physical and social obstacles that prevent them from receiving an education, prevent them from getting jobs even when they are well qualified, prevent them from accessing information, prevent them from obtaining proper health care, and prevent them from getting around, prevent them from fitting in and being accepted. So the question is, what about existing legislation? Is it working? With some countries have enacted comprehensive legislation in this regard, many have not. Because of discriminatory practice, person with disabilities tends to live in the shadow of margin of society, and as a result, the rights are overlooked. So a universal legally binding standard is needed to ensure that the rights of persons with disability are guaranteed everywhere. So they have the right, there had been prior effort to promote disability legislation. In 1993, the United Nations adopted a standard rule on the equalization of opportunities to disabled persons that have provided policy guidelines on promoting the same opportunities to persons with disability and that others enjoy. And these have served as model legislation for a number of countries. The rules, however, are not legally binding instruments, and disability advocates not at that there are no enforceable obligation without conviction. Now, how about how will the new convention help persons with disabilities? Throughout history, persons with disabilities have been viewed as individuals who require societal protection and evoke sympathy rather than respect. This convention is a major step toward changing the perception of disability and ensure that the societies recognize all people must be provided with opportunity to live life to their fullest potential, whatever that may be. So by ratifying the convention and after the treaty have come into force, the country may accept its legal obligation under the treaty and will adopt implementing legislation. Other human rights treaties, such as Convention on the Rights of Children and Women, have had major effect in addressing right violation. Now there is another question. How was the content of the convention decided upon? The negotiation of the convention embodied the principle nothing about us without us. The convention was drafted by ad hoc committee on a comprehensive and integral international convention and the protection and promotion of rights and dignity of persons with disabilities ad hoc committee, which is a committee of the United Nations General Assembly. Its membership is open to all United Nations member states and observer during its first session. The ad hoc committee decided that representatives from non-government organizations, NGOs, accredited to ad hoc committee could also participate in meeting and make statements in accordance with the United Nations practice. Since then, the General Assembly has repeatedly urged that effort be made to active involve disability organization in the work of ad hoc committee to the process organization of persons with disability and other NGOs had been very active in providing comments and information from a disability perspective. Since its establishment, the ad hoc committee held 8 sessions and its first 2 sessions in 2002, 2003, and the committee considered the possibility of drafting an international instrument on the right of person with disability and discuss the possible of instrument, and discuss the type of instrument and possible element to be included. As its second session, the ad hoc committee established a working group to prepare draft text of the convention. So the working group composed of government and NGO representatives met in January 2004 and drafted the text negotiation. At its third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth session, the ad hoc committee continued its negotiation. The convention text was finalized by the ad hoc committee in August 26, 2006. A drafting group tasked with ensuring uniformity of terminology throughout the text of the draft convention and harmonizing the version in the official language of the United Nations reviewed the text from September to November 2006. The United Nations General Assembly adopted the text of the Convention on the Right of Persons with a Disability and its option protocol on 13th December 2006. Now another question is, how was the convention negotiated? The General Assembly established ad hoc committee in 2001 to negotiate the convention. So the first meeting was in August 2002 and drafting its text began in May 2004. In 2006, the committee reached agreement on text delegated to the ad hoc committee represented NGOs, government, National Human Rights Institute, and the international organization. It was the first time that NGO has actively participated in the formulation of human rights instrument. Now another question is, how accessible was the negotiation process? The method to ensure accessibility during the negotiation process increased in sophistication over time. Method progress from diskette and the document in braille to email, website facilities communication. A website was created to accessible to conformance level A according to the standards set by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 1.0. Among other features, this level of accessibility allowed users to assistive technology such as screen reader to access the website effectively and allow the resizing of text for those who needed to view enlarged text. Working document for the negotiation of the convention text were posted to the website as soon as they were discussed with during the session of the ad hoc committee, an innovative practice of the United Nations Convention negotiation. The website does provide instant worldwide access to rapidly changing progress of the discussion, giving the opportunity for groups around the world to speed up the process in timely manner and or precise issue. So in addition to that, the conference room at the United Nations headquarters in New York, where negotiations were held, was made Wi-Fi accessibility or Wi-Fi accessible midway through the negotiating process. The Wi-Fi allowed person in the room to electronically access the head and to electronically access and read the document being discussed using a system device as necessary. So all ad hoc committee meetings were held in a wheelchair accessible conference room, and NICLOP provides upon request for a person while hearing impairment. Alam niyo kung bakit nabanggit ko tong mga disabilities. Marami tayong mga marino na dahil sa kanilang pagsampa sa barko, sa kanilang trabaho, nagiging disabled sila. So sana sa mga nakikinig, kung may kakilala man kayo ng mga disabled seafarer, mapulutan ninyo ng aral itong sabi ko. At least matulungan natin ang ating kapwa ayon sa intensyon ng batas. Hindi napabayaan na lang kasi sabihin na, merisin yan, nung araw yan, mayabang kasi yan. So hindi na dapat ang ginagawa natin. So kung kailangan tulungan natin, tulungan natin. So may isa pa rin na katanungan dito. When will the new convention take effect? Kailan? So the convention will take effect or enter into force 30 days after that 20 countries have ratified. So only 20 countries is needed in order to effect this convention. So what does the convention cover? The purpose of the convention is to promote, protect, and ensure full equal enjoyment of all human rights by persons with disability. It covers a number of key areas such as accessibility, personal mobility, health education, employment, rehabilitation, participation in political life, and equality and non-discrimination. So the convention makes a shift in thinking about disability from a social welfare concern to a human rights issue which acknowledge that societal barrier and prejudice are themselves disabling. Now, sa mga nakikinig, ito palawakin ninyo ang inyong ideya. Baka sabihin ninyo na ang itong convention ay nabanggit ko ay para lamang sa mga seaman. No. This involves every person. Kahit hindi ka seaman, kung disabled ka, pero kailangan may right and freedom ka to practice kung ano man ang ginagawa ng mga tao na hindi sila disabled. Equal tayo. So, sa madaling salita, itong mga nabanggit ko ay applicable din ito sa mga disabled person na nandito sa lupa. Di lamang dito sa Pilipinas, kundi sa buong mundo. So another question is, does this convention create new light? No, it cannot create new light. The convention does not create any new light or entitlement. What the convention does, however, is expressing existing right in a manner that addresses the needs and situation of a person with disability. So, will this convention create obligation for state? Yes, the state will be obligated to introduce measures that promote human rights of person with disability without discrimination. So, maliwanag, ang bansa dapat ang mag-promote nito. So, these measures would include anti-discrimination legislation, eliminate law and practice that discriminate against person with disability, and consider person with a basic disability when adopting new policies and programs. So other measures include making services, goods, family accessible to person with disability. So are the obligation of state who has signed the convention. What are the obligation, of the state to sign the convention? So the obligation of a state to sign the convention is the state party to the convention are committing to respect the right of person with disability, protect the right of person with disability, and fulfill the right of person with disability. So another question is, does it make economic sense for countries to adopt the convention? Yes, of course. Besides the obvious problem of putting price tag on the basic human right for significant segment of the population, it turns out that it is actually good economic to ensure that disabled persons are able to live up their potential. When there are no obstacle in their way, disabled persons are employee, entrepreneur, consumer, and taxpayer, along with everybody else. So what will it cost to implement? So the convention calls for the progressive realization of the most of its provision in line with the resources of economic countries. Some steps will require money, and for other countries where resources are scarce, it is hoped that the international assistance which has neglected the need of person with disability will help. So if ever possible, there is a so-called international assistance if the government has to do their obligation as far as the implementation of this convention is concerned. So making changes in line with the convention benefit not only person with disabilities but also other person as well. Elevators and ramps, for example, provides more options for everyone. Design changes to that are needed to accommodate the convention will. Over time, generates new ideas and innovations that will improve life of the people, not only for person with disability. Now, how will this convention be monitored by at the international level? So once the convention enters into force, the Committee on the Right of Person with Disability will monitor its implementation. You have to remember that the Committee on the Right of Person with Disability will monitor its implementation. Countries that ratify that convention will need to report regularly on their progress to the committee. Ginagawa kaya ng Pilipinas yan? Kung ginagawa nila, maganda. An option protocol allows citizens in those countries to choose to ratify the protocol and possibility of launching an individual complaint to the committee if there are no more rational option left. So what is disability and who are person with disability? The term person with disability is used to apply to all person with disability including those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairment, which in interaction with various attitudinal and environmental barrier hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. However, this minimum list of persons who may claim protection under the convention does not exhaust the categories of the disabilities which fall within the it nor intend to undermine or stand in the way of wider definition of disability under the national law, such as person with short disability. It is also important to note that a person with disabilities may be regarded as person with disability in other society or setting, but not in another, depending on the role that a person is assured to take in his or her community. The perception and reality of disability also depend on the technology, assistance, and service available, as well as cultural consideration. In most parts of the world, there are deep and persistent negative stereotype and prejudice against persons with certain condition and differences. The attitude themselves also shape who is considered to be person with a disability in its society, as well as have contributed to a negative image of person with disability. The language used to refer to person with disability has played significant role in the persistence of negative stereotypes. Clearly terms such as crippled or mentally retarded are derogative. Other terms such as wheelchair bound or disabled person emphasize the disability before a person. So the drafter of this convention were clear that disability should be seen as a result of the interaction between a person and his or her environment. Disability is not something that resides in individual as a result of some impairment. The convention recognizes that the disability is an evolving concept of that legislation may adapt to reflect positive changes within the society. So disability resides in society, not in a person. A person with wheelchair might have difficulties being gainfully employed, not because of her condition, but because there are environment barriers such as inaccessible buses or staircase in the workplace which obstruct his or her access. A child with intellectual disability might have difficulty going to school due to attitude of teacher, school board, and possibly parents who are unable to adapt to students with different learning capacities. So in a society where corrective lenses are available for someone with extreme myopia, or we call it nearsightedness, this person would not be considered to have disability. However, someone with the same condition in a society where corrective lenses were not available would be considered to have disability, especially if the level of vision prevented the person from performing tasks expected of this person, such as sheep herding, sowing, or farming. So another question is, what rights are addressed in the convention? So the purpose of the convention is to promote, protect, and ensure full equal enjoyment of all human rights by person with disabilities. The article of the Convention recognizes all rights, civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. The United Nations promotes the notion that these rights cannot be separated, and thus the Convention addresses them as integrated aspects of the entire spectrum of individual rights. These rights identify action-oriented policy intervention of the state to adopt in order to actively bring the legislative and judicial system in line with the Convention. So here are the specific rights covered by the Convention: the equal protection before the law, the liberty and security of a person, freedom from torture, protection of the integrity of a person, liberty of movement and nationality, freedom of expression, respect of privacy, the right to participate in public life, freedom from exploitation, respect for home and family, right to live in a community, right to education, right to life, right to health, habilitation and rehabilitation, right to work, right to an adequate standard of living, right to participate in cultural life. Now, napansin ba ninyo na ngayong may pandemya, pag wala kang vaccination, ay sabi nila hindi ka na pwede makapagtrabaho, tanggalin ka na. Now, may kaugnayan yata ito sa ang konbensyon na pinag-uusapan natin sa mga pangyayari ngayon. Ang katanungan dyan ay itong mga local government units or local government leaders natin. Nabasa kaya nila ito? Una-unawaan kaya nila ito ang konbensyon na ito? Na ang karapatan ng mga disabled ay dapat igalang. Na kung ang mga disabled nga ginagalang. Lalo pa ito naman mga tao na walang sakit, ayaw lang magpabakuna dahil alam nila na hindi nang kailangan ng kanilang katawan. So yan ang mga issue na dapat natin mamuni-muni, which is right and which is wrong. Kaya napilitan ako na ilabas ang mga issue nito tungkol sa International Convention kasi batas ito. Sabihin man natin na International Convention is not a law, pero po once na ratify at ginawa ng isang bansa or state particular convention na batas, magiging batas ang convention. Now, may isa pa katanungan, is it expensive to make building accessible? Over time, new construction should incorporate design that it takes to account the needs of a person with disability. In studies, World Bank found that the cost building on this feature at the time of construction is minimal. It has been shown that making building accessible at less than 1% of the construction cost. So what is the society missing out on? The larger talent, the larger talent pool, a person with disability can contribute a wide array of expertise, skills, and talent, while persons with disabilities face high unemployment rate than the rest of the population in the virtually every country. Study shows that the job performance of persons with disability is as good, if not better, than the general population. High retention rate and less absenteeism have more than offset fear that it's too costly to accommodate the need of a person with disability in the workplace. Furthermore, fear that hiring person with disability adds significant cost to employer are overblown. In 2003, survey in the United States found that almost 3/4 of employer reported that employee with disability did not require any special accommodation. So maliwanag, di nila kailangan may special accommodation. Basta mabigyan lang sila ng access. Pagaya niyan, so kung wheelchair siya, dapat may elevated naman. Huwag yung step Kasi kung hagdan ang ilagay mo, hindi na sila makadaan dyan dahil wheelchair ang kanilang ginagamit. So dapat maunawaan natin ang mga bagay-bagay na yan. Ulitin ko, ito ay hindi lamang sa mga seaman, kundi sa lahat na mamamayan. Applicable ang konbensyon na nabanggit ko. So sana napulutan natin ng aral ang konbensyon na ito na nabanggit. At makatulong tayo at magtulong-tulong tayo para sa ikabubuti ng ating pamumuhay dito sa mundong ibabaw. Habang tayo ay dumadaan, minsanan lamang. At hindi na tayo makabalik. Oras na mawala na tayo sa mundong ito. So ngayon, ito na ngayon, itukoy ko na ngayon to sa mga marino. Ang tinatawag na International Convention and Standard of Training Certification of Watchkeeping for Seafarers. So the International Convention and STCW 78 was adopted by the International Conference of Training Certification for Seafarers on July 7, 1978. At tinawag ito na STCW 78. Although, naamindahan ito no 1991, 1994, 1995, 1997, 1998, 2004, 2006, 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2018. So, mapansin ninyo pag sinabi ang STCW as amended, bakit na may Manila Amendment? Kasi itong Manila Amendment, dito ginawa ito sa Manila noong 2010. Ngunit itong 2010 Manila Amendment, na-amend ulit ito noong 2014, 15, 16, and 18. So the 1991 Amendment relating to Global Maritime Distress and Safety, or GMDSA for short, and conduct of trial were adopted by the resolution MEC 2159 and entered into force on December 1992. So napansin niyo ang gumagawa ng circular is Maritime Safety Committee, or MEC for short. The 1974 Amendment on training, on special training requirement for personnel of tanker were adopted by Resolution MEC 33 and entered into force on January 1, 1996. In the 1995 Amendment were adopted by Resolution 1 of the Conference of Parties to the International Convention on STCW, which was convened by the International Maritime Organization and met at the headquarters of the organization from June 26 to July 7, 1995. So the 1975 STCW Conference adopted by the Seafarers Training Certification Watchkeeping Code, STCW for short. So the STCW Code contain in 1, Part A, mandatory provision to which specific reference is made in annex to the STCW Convention and which gives in detail the minimum requirement, minimum standard required to be maintained by the parties in order to give full and complete effect to the provision of STCW Convention. So tandaan nito mga kapwa ko marino. Part A is a mandatory provision. So mandatory, obligado tayo dyan. At itong Part B is only a recommended guidelines. Guide lang natin ito. Hindi pwede na gawing mandatory. Ngunit ang nangyari dito sa Pilipinas sa kabaliktaran, hindi Part A, hindi Part B, footnote lang. Footnote. Ginawang mandatory requirement for certification. So, napakagaling ang Pilipino pagdating sa kalukuhan, di ba? Now, napansin ngayon ito ng International Maritime Organization at saka European Maritime Safety Agency na mukhang hindi maganda. Kaya nagkaroon tayo ng threat na ito, kung hindi nyo masunod ito, hindi na kayo makabiyahe dito sa amin bansa. So, sino ang malugi? Yung gumawa ng korupsyon o ang mga seaman? So, ang biktima ng korupsyon ay ang pobreng marino na taon-taon nag-contribute ng more or less 5.6 billion dollars sa ating ekonomiya. At ito namang mga sumira sa profesyon ng mga marino, wala sila pakialam. Kasi buwan-buwan may sahod naman sila tinatanggap. Dahil hindi mas matanggal dyan kung ma-blacklist ang Pilipino seafarer sa Europe. So, the 1997 Amendment to the Convention and Part A of the Code relating to training personnel passengers, RoRo passenger ship, were adopted by the Maritime Safety Committee 66 resolution and 67 and entered into force in January 1, 2003. The 1998 Amendment of Part A of the Code relating to enhanced competence in cargo handling and stowage, particularly in respect of bulk cargo, were adopted by a resolution entered into force in January 2003. January 1, 2003. So, ang badaliin ko na ang itong amendment noong 2010, ang intensyon ng International Maritime Organization kung bakit naamindahan ang STCW noong 2010. So ito, liwanagin ko sa inyo at ito tandaan ninyo at ipasok ninyo sa inyong isipan at sa puso. The 2010 Amendment or Manila Amendment for short were adopted by Resolution 1 and 2 respectively by the Conference of Parties to STCW Convention held in Manila from 21 to 25 June 2010, and it is being called the 2010 STCW Conference. The amendment mainly introduced 1, to improve measures to prevent fraudulent practices associated with certificate of competency and strengthen the evaluation process, monitoring parties' compliance with the convention. Alam ninyo kung bakit na may sinabi sila na fraudulent practice. Kung malala ninyo nung kinontrata ng International Maritime Organization ng Seafarers International Research Center sa England, kinontak nila ako. Nung kinontak nila ako, sabi niya, Ben, baka pwede kami magbisita dyan at paki-accommodate mo kami. So, I said, okay. Nung dumating sila, doon yan nakita na may 1,180 fake certificate na umiikot hawak ng mga seaman natin. Alam mo kung bakit? Nung pumunta sila sa Recto, yan sa Recto, napakarami ang mga gumagawa ng sertipiko. Hanggang ngayon, although pinunaan ni Mayor Isko Moreno yan, pero ngayon, dumaan ako nung isang araw doon, napakarami naman. Sabi sa akin, ilan sir ang diploma gusto mo ipagawa? So, biro ko yung diploma. Kaya ko minsan, may mga kaibigan ako na sabi niya, ako, doktor of philosophy na ako. Magaling ka po. Saan mo kinuha? Recto? Tawa siya. Pero, marami gumagawa dyan. Then, nung araw na ginagawa ko ng assessment, napansin ko, pati pirma ko, napirma nila sa Recto. Dahil sa profound master nung araw, so ako may pirma ng sertipiko ng mga seaman, napansin ko, ako, dito pala, parang kamukha rin ng pirma ko. Ngunit, di lang nila alam na may tanda ako kung saan banda dyan sa litra ng pangalan ko, magsimula ang aking pirma. Kaya nahalata ako na hindi akin, gawa na hindi doon ayon sa aking point na dapat doon ako magsimula ng pagpirma ko. So, yan napansin nyo siguro yan na simula nung napuna yan, nagtigil ang mga paggawa ng fake certificate sa Recto. Ngunit ngayon, kahit nasabihin man ni Mayor Isko na pinatanggal na niya yan, pero ngayon bumalik na maulit sila. So, the second kahalagahan is to strengthen, the provision of medical standard. So, to strengthen medical standard. Kaya mapansin ninyo ngayon na ako sa more or less 39 years na nag-marino ako, hindi ako nakaranas tusukin ng doktor ang puwet ko. Pero ngayon siguro kayo mismo magpatunay na pag pumunta kayo sa medical, pagpa-medical kayo, tinutusok ang puwet niyo. So, ang katuwiran ng doktor diyan, to strengthen the provision of medical standard. Ngunit hindi nila naisip na 'pag tinusok ang puwet mo, 'yun maging isang dahilan, magkasakit ka, alam mo kung bakit, hindi ka prepared. So, kung oras na magkasakit ka na, balik ka naman ulit sa kanila. So, pagtirahan ka nila. So, opinion ko lang 'yan, personal opinion ko. Pero I doubt I am not mistaken dahil 'yan nasabi ko sa inyo na for almost 39 years na nagseaman ako, hindi ako nakaranas tusukin ang puwet ko. Kaya lately nung, magpa-medical ako nung sabi nila tusukin nila ang puwet ko, 'di na ako nagpa-medical at kinausap nila sila ng manning agency na, "Sige bigyan mo lang ng good or fit for work kasi kailangan namin." So, hindi ba masaya? So, hindi maganda ang nangyayari ngayon sa mga Pilipino seafarers. The third is revise requirement on hour of work, rest hour in your requirement for the prevention of drugs and alcohol. The fourth is the new certification requirement for able seafarers, deck and engine. The fifth is a requirement relating to training in modern technology such as electronic charge and information system or ICDIS. Number 7 is requirement for marine environment awareness, training, and training leadership and teamwork. Number 7, a training and certification requirement for electro-technical officer or electro-technical rating. And 8 is the updating of competence requirement for personnel serve on board all types of tanker, including new requirement of personnel serving and liquefied gas tanker. And 9 is the new requirement for security training for all seafarers, as well as provision to ensure that seafarers are properly trained regarding piracy, armed robbery. And number 10, a refresher course module every 5 years for basic training on personnel survival technique and fire prevention and firefighting, advanced firefighting and proficiency in survival. Now, ito ang sinasabi ko nina. Dito sila acted. Nung makausap ko sila, sabi ko bakit nang napare-train nyo at saka napare-refresh yung seaman. Sabi, basahin mo sir. Refresher training module every 5 years for basic training. Nandiyan tayo. For every 5 years. But if you have proof or evidence that within the 5-year period, you are doing this. Napakaliwanag ang sabi ng STW. Shipboard experience and training is acceptable. So bakit hindi mo ma-accept? Bakit dito ka sa number 10 paragraph nito mag-base? Bakit yung chapter 6 ng STW hindi mo masunod? Which is right and which is wrong now? Hindi ba may kaibahan? So it was not been interpreted in accordance with the role of interpretation. So number 11 is introduction of modern training methodology including distance learning and e-learning. So may e-learning. Pero dito sa atin, nagkaroon lang, sabi lang bang e-learning na tayo dahil may pandemya. Ngunit ang problema sa e-learning, kuminsan, learning, na lang ang naiwan, ang learning nawala, na lang ang naiwan. So number 12 is the new training guidance for personnel serving on board a ship operating in the polar water. Part A currently contain mandatory provision in this regard. So the new training and guidance for personnel operating in dynamic positioning is the last. So in 2014, the amendment were adopted by resolution MEC 373 and 374. The amendment updated chapter provision by STW chapter 1, standard regarding general provision of STW code, part A and third to fourth in January 2016. So in 2015, amendment were adopted by resolution 396 and 397 as amended, and updated chapter of the provision regulation 1112 chapter 5, special training requirement for personnel certain type of ships, and introduce a new B/3, the training requirement for personnel or ship subject to IGF code and STCW code, and entered into force in January 2017. So in 2016, amendments were adopted by resolution MEC 416 and 417. The amendment updated chapter and a special training requirement for personnel. And to make it short, all these STCW convention were adopted by International Maritime Organization. However, the interpretation has to be in accordance with the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties. So, for the information of everyone, there is no question when we have to follow the STCW Convention. The only issue here to be resolved is, does the interpretation is in accordance with the STCW Convention. So kaya sa mga kapwa ko marino nakikinig at saka sa mga mamamayan na nakikinig, when it comes to convention or international convention or international treaty ratified by the Republic of the Philippines, ang una-unang isipin natin is, does that convention was interpreted in accordance with the main intent and purpose under Article 31 of Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties. So sana napulutan ninyo ng aral itong naipaliwanag ko ngayong gabi at makatulong din sa inyong kabuhayan. Hindi lamang sa mga marino, kundi sa buong mamayan Pilipino, dahil ang convention na pinagsasabi ko hindi lamang sa marino, kundi na sa buong sambayanan. So, magkita-kita kayo muli kada Biyernes alas 7 hanggang alas 9 ng gabi. At ako muna pansamantala nagpapaalam. Ako po ay si Chief Engineer Bienvenido Lorque at sana ang mga nabanggit ko ay makatulong sa inyo. At I am assisted by our IT, Mel Lugod, who is a good person, doing his best para makatulong din sa inyo. Mel, you have something to say? Last word? So he has nothing to say, and thank you very much. At sana, ulitin ko, sana napulutan ninyo ng aral ang mga napag-usapan ngayong gabi. Good night.
Itong COVID-19 na dumako sa bayan natin, wala nang ginawa kundi ang buhay ay sirain. Buong mundo ang may problema, paano ang virus supuin? Pinoy ang nag-invento, isang spray tawag ay alizin. Alizin, alizin, ito ang panlaban sa COVID-19. Alizin, alizin, virus ay kayang tanggalin. Spray mo lang sa bibig at lalamunan. Spray mo din sa ilong at mga mata. Sa damit na iyong gagamitin, spray mo din ang alizin. Gumamit ng alizin, ng virus ay paalisin. Pag lahat nag-spray ng alizin,
Hello,
What's your name?
Charles Christian Alisa.
And what do you do?
By profession, I'm a medical laboratory scientist.
Scientist. Oh, and you saw the results of alizin spray?
Yes.
So, anong tingin niyo dun sa results ng alizin spray?
Overwhelming yung effect niya kasi I think it's much better pa sa antibiotic.
Why?
Kasi basing on the laboratory result, kasi doon talaga ako mag-base kung ako yun. Basing on that, yung within 1 minute, na-eliminate niya yung virus, which is hindi kaya ng antibiotic. Kasi ang antibiotic is 1 to 2 minutes, kaya niyang mag-proceed na magkaroon ng zone of inhibition. Ito, 1 minute lang nawala na.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.